I'm making an old school survival horror game called The Revanchist, inspired by some of the genre's classics, including Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and Fatal Frame. And it finally has a Steam page. Go wishlist it. I wasn't asking. Go do it. So I'm approaching the 2-month mark for my development, and while there's still a long way to go, I'm starting to feel like I've got a pretty decent foundation put together. Today I want to talk about a couple of things that I've been putting together, but first I want to start with music. Music is super important in games, but especially in horror. Problem is, I've never made music before and have always been terrible with it.
Is mayonnaise an instrument?
When I had to take band class in grade 6, I could never actually learn how to play an instrument, read sheet music, any of that. I just memorized how to play the songs by ear, and I haven't touched anything musical ever since. So I've just been using GarageBand on my phone for this. I want to talk a bit about my process for making music for the game, but first, let's take a look at a few of the tracks I've already made. Up first is a track I call Ghostly Ambience. I wanted this to be a more subtle background track, something vaguely creepy but not too attention-grabbing. Most of the audio is synthesized vocals. Deep harmonic waves give the main sound of the track a deep, wobbly drone. The voice scanner provides a more recognizable vocal sound to the track, with a low-pitched, distorted growl. Up next is Low Ambience. Yeah, I'm getting really creative with these names. I wanted this track to feel physically heavy and suffocating. I wanted to make the atmosphere feel thick and soupy, almost as if you're submerged underwater. I used hacksaw bass to give it this kind of muffled, warbled percussion. Suspense bass gives a rough, technological feel to the track, which is going to be kind of a recurring theme throughout this soundtrack. Think supernatural meets technology, with an occasional hint of wonder and nostalgia. Up next is Liminal Ambience. So since making and naming this one, the word liminal has become very associated with liminal spaces, backrooms, that sort of thing. In this case, it's more of a literal use of the word, meaning transitional, referring to when and where the track is used in-game. So I wanted this one to still feel oppressive, but almost a little bit wondrous and fantastical. I wanted to make you feel surrounded by unseen entities, things whizzing past you. At the time I made this, it was easily the most complicated track I had ever made. It was also where I introduced the tune gongs, which have become kind of a motif? Motif? Motive? Just now realizing I've only ever seen that word written. I want to say motif, it sounds fancy. So one of the main tracks in this one is the quote-unquote beautiful synth harp, which is heavily distorted to give a shrill, grating tone that sounds like it's rapidly rushing past the listener. From there, we move on to techno ambience. So this is a simpler one. I wanted the sound to evoke feelings of some sort of like imposing electronics. I don't really know enough about music or sound to describe it better than that, but you kind of get what I'm going for. Maybe. Hopefully. Up next is breathing ambience. Another simple one. A very low, bassy track. It uses the voice scanner and the female choir synths to create a deep, pulsing sound. I wanted this one to sound like if the entire environment itself is breathing. You're engulfed by this living, breathing entity. Bell ambience. Getting real creative with these names. Yet another simple track. I wanted to have the tuned gongs front and center in this one. I also wanted to make something that focuses in on that wondrous feel, so I put together this unnamed song. So I wanted to make this one calm and a bit fantastical. I made sure to keep it feeling creepy and disquieting at the same time. So at this point, I had a nice little selection of ambient background tracks, but I wanted to put something together for combat. I wanted it to be a bit more musical with some semblance of beat and rhythm to it. The eloquently titled Combat 1. Now, this was going to be the theme for a specific boss fight that had been cut from the new retro-inspired version of the game, and as of now at least, there really isn't anywhere else that it's going to fit, so consider this track cut. Even though I'm getting rid of it, I'm low-key kind of proud of this one. It's the only track I've made that at least vaguely sounds musical and has some sort of progression. As the fight progressed, the slow-paced synth waves would start to distort, and a rough backing track starts to pick up. Eventually, the synthwave would fade out almost entirely and be totally overpowered by this distorted hacksaw bass. Even though this likely won't be in the Revanchist, I still want to hold on to this one. I think I'm going to have a use for it in my next project in the future, but I'm not even going to start talking about that until the Revanchist is done. So this pretty much covers all the tracks I made for the old version of the game around 2019 or so. Since restarting development, I've also made a few additional tracks. First up is a new combat track. This one's a bit less out there compared to the previous one. I've made two different versions of it, one that's a bit less intense and one that's a bit more so. I still have to differentiate them a little bit more though. Then there's harsh ambience. I wanted something to be harsh, grating, but smooth for lack of a better term. Something versatile, not too intrusive. Then there's peaceful ambience, which is basically the antithesis to harsh ambience. You've already heard this one before. If you haven't, go watch this video here. Then there's forest calm. You've heard this one too if you've seen my previous video. So I've added a bit of progression to this one since the last time, but there's still some work to do. And on that note, there's one more thing I want to make. Some sort of save room theme. I made this the same way I make all the rest of the tracks. Think of a vibe I'm going for, pick a random synth, and fuck around with it till I find a sound I like. Then I start mashing the keys on the keyboard like an unsupervised toddler at a wedding until I find some sort of rhythm that fits. Once I get a general feel for what I want to do, I just start recording it. Then, rinse and repeat. Pick another instrument, start fucking around with it, just the same as I did with the first one. I really make sure to not overcommit to any particular instrument or rhythm. If something doesn't resonate with me right away, I move on and try something else. It's really the only way I can get a handful of serviceable tracks for the game. Rapid fire, throw shit at the wall, see what sticks. So if something just isn't working out pretty much right away, I usually won't have the skill to make it work at all, so ditch it and move on. So I spent about an hour on this track, tried a bunch of different sounds, and by the time it was done, not actually done, but good enough of a foundation for me to leave it for now, this is what I had. Now, I know I skimmed past those pretty quick. I'm not the most patient guy in the world myself, and I don't want to waste anyone's time on this. If you do want to listen to those tracks in detail, go check out this video. I put one full uninterrupted loop of each song. Okay, enough about making the music, because there's one more problem here. I still don't have any way to properly play the music in the game. Most of the music you've seen in the videos has just been added in post. In-game, I just had the level blueprint, played the sound on loop when the level starts to get some way to play it. So this just isn't going to fly in the final game. I need a system that gives me the control to start, stop, fade between tracks, as well as adjust their volume on the fly. So from there, I started by making a meta sound. I've never used these before, so it took a bit of doing, but I got a simple setup put together that works with the Soundtrack Manager blueprint and lets me mix up to 4 different tracks, switch between them, and set their gain individually. I've added a way to switch the sound wave attached to any of the 4 tracks at any time. Now it's time to set this up in an actual level. For the forest soundtrack, it's just controlled with triggers. For instance, when you walk through this first volume here, it lowers the music to 50% volume. Then at the cabin, it'll fade out the forest theme entirely and play the save room music. It also fades out the birds and wind when you enter the cabin, which are treated as part of the soundtrack, and then fades them back in when you exit. I honestly love this setup. As much as I try to make things smooth and easy to work with, I really don't know what I'm doing, so it ends up being really scuffed. This Soundtrack Manager is the first thing I've made for this game that feels polished to use on the back end. No jank, no bullshit, it's simple and robust. I know it's not much in the grand scheme of things, but I don't know, this little Soundtrack Manager just makes me happy. I just think it's neat. So while we're on the topic of sound, there's something that I actually added a while ago that I want to actually start using in the game. I put this in when I first made the forest level, but I didn't have a sound effect for it and was too lazy to go out and get one, so I just shelved it for that time. Whenever the player takes a step in-game, the game runs a sphere trace to see if they're overlapping any object with the plant physical material, and plays a sound if you are. So I finally put together some sound effects for it and re-enabled the function. Just like footsteps, the volume of the plants is dependent on your speed. Another detail I've been meaning to add for a while is squeaky floorboards. I want them to be in fixed, consistent spots, so I made a blueprint for them. So I started off by trying to make them a volume that plays the sound when the player overlaps them. It didn't line up with the footsteps, it just sounded off. And I spent longer than I'd like to admit trying to make these blueprints fire off the sound effects when the player character makes a footstep sound, but I didn't have any luck. Eventually I realized I could just give them a new squeaky wood material and add a new footstep sound in the player character. Work smarter, not harder, I guess. These are all simple effects, but they contribute a lot to the immersion. Take the footsteps for instance. Adding just a few different sounds for different types of ground makes things so much more convincing. So let's have a look at how the level feels with this new soundtrack. I haven't put together any looping versions of the tracks yet, so you'll hear some hard cuts, but this audio is all from in-game. I also went and added a soundtrack to this Office test level. This gave me a chance to experiment with more dynamic music that switches with gameplay. By the way, look at this little fucker. Look at this guy. This guy? Just fine. This one? Bruh. Why? Finally, I got a simple setup put together on the house map. This one's nice and simple. It starts the peaceful ambience theme, fades it down a bit after about 20 seconds. I also put a volume outside the house that fades down the music further and ramps up the birds and wind when you enter it. Now, time for another non sequitur. So the character's movement feed feels fine overall, but in tight, confined spaces like the cabin and his house, it's way too fast. Now in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal. Especially since I already have a walk button that slows down your movement if you feel the need, it still doesn't feel great. This was another really easy setup. It's just a volume that lowers the player's base speed while they're overlapping it. I'm only going to use these in particularly tight spaces. Things like hallways are generally going to be left at full speed. But this is another case of a small, simple feature that makes the game feel way smoother to play. Then finally, I want to start doing a little bit more detailing. I'm going to start by getting the interior of the cabin a little bit more fleshed out. I want the environments in the Revanchist to tell a bit of a story, and the cabin is no different. While I'm still not going to be getting too deep into the story quite yet, I am interested to hear if anyone has any theories, so let me know if you got any thoughts about what it might be. So first thing I did for the cabin is make this chest freezer. Nice and simple, nothing you've never seen before. And word of warning for this next part. If you're on the squeamish side, you might want to look away for a few seconds. In that case, why don't you pop over and wishlist the Revanchist on Steam while you're waiting. Okay, so to fill the freezer I made this rotting meat texture. I made sure it is nice and gross looking. It was alright, but it's still missing a little bit of something. Needs a little bit of zest, some zing. I put together this adorable maggot texture and used a ripple filter in Photoshop to give it a simple 2-frame flipbook animation. I also put together a new material that'll dynamically layer this effect into the dark spots of any texture that I plug in. So pair that up with a few decals. Fuck, this is just the video of words that I don't know how to actually say. Decals, I'm gonna say decals. Anyways, pair that with a few decals and this super simple fly particle system and mwah, perfect. I also want to put together this little workstation on this table off to the side, which actually is the main reason the cabin exists at all. I put together a bunch of small assets to build out this little soldering station with a disassembled receiver. And so I want to take a second to illustrate why I'm using this super pixelated 240p screen resolution. I'm gonna keep it quick because this video is already running way longer than I intended, and I want to talk a bit more about it in the future. But I've heard a few complaints that the pixelation is too strong, and it's too hard to see what things actually look like, but that's really the point. You see, the models and textures are really low detail. The nice thing about the low screen resolution is it lets your brain fill in these details and lets things look way more vivid and detailed than they actually are, and elicits a way stronger response. Believe me, I get where people are coming from, and it eats away a little bit at my soul every time I have to cover up all my hard work with this. Take this maggot material for instance. I spent a good couple hours putting it together, tuning and adjusting it, but in-game, it's almost impossible to notice. But here's the thing. Take a second to look at this shot. Now look at this. Now take a look at this.
Take a look at this!
Then this. If you're anything like me, at least this had a lot more impact than this. So sad as I am to continuously cover up so much of my hard work, I feel it's worth it for the overall experience. So I've actually been sitting on this video for a little while now. I wanted to wait for the Steam page to be published before I posted it. Marketing, baby! So I actually do have a bunch more to show off, so new video should actually be coming out fairly soon after this one, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll see. But anyways, thanks again for watching, it means the world to me. Make sure you go wishlist the Revanchist on Steam, and if you know anyone who's a fan of survival horror, feel free to point them in my direction. And definitely don't be afraid to let me know if you have any thoughts or opinions on this project so far. Questions, comments, criticism, snide remarks, it's always welcome. Thank you very much, and have a fantastic rest of your day.